I'm a vintage girl wearing vintage clothes at an antique mall, driving a vintage car. I would say I'm pretty obsessed with vintage. One of my most favorite items that I own is probably the vintage sauna. Elvis Presley actually had the exact same one. I have a 1955 Dodge Royal Lancer in a beautiful mint green color, and she's my pride and joy. I definitely get a lot of conversations going when I'm out in public. The biggest controversial thing is that because I live in a 50s home, people automatically say I'm racist. My grandfather was a news journalist in Detroit, Michigan. He was able to interview all of old Hollywood stars, Tony Bennett, Bobby Darin, all of those. And so my mother would always go along with him. And actually the entryway wall to my home is all of the original autographs that my mother was able to get from that. So I grew up with my mom always telling me stories of meeting these old Hollywood stars. And so that's really what started my love for vintage. I'm specifically drawn to the 1950s era. There's just something about the furniture, the shapes of them, the colors that they used. It was a very colorful era. I'm just so drawn to all that. When we were shopping for a house, I knew I wanted a house that was built in the 50s, so it had that history and charm. So it took us a year and a half to do the entire house, and that cost about $50,000. Everything in the house is 100% vintage. So when we first moved into this home, there was this little nook right off of the living room, and it's kind of a unique setting, but when I saw it, I immediately knew I was gonna turn it into a tiki room. I absolutely love Disneyland. Disneyland has really influenced my entire design for the house. I would say one of my most favorite items that I own is probably the vintage sauna that is behind me, because it's a really rare item to have, and Elvis Presley actually had the exact same one. I would say the sauna was the most expensive. That was around $1,200, but if we want to talk most expensive, probably the car. I have a 1955 Dodge Royal Lancer in a beautiful mint green color, and she's my pride and joy. I got that one for about $9,000. My wardrobe is entirely vintage. If you're gonna have a vintage house, you have to dress accordingly. One dress that I found at an antique store that I absolutely fell in love with. It's a beautiful long blue gown. So I love when I wear that dress. It's a very special, rare item. When my husband and I first got together, he was more on the love for the vintage music and movies. So when we merged together, it was my love of the style and the decor, and his was the music, the film, and the dancing. All right, what am I doing?
So you're going to take this, you're going to pull it, whenever it bends, just let it snap right there.
Oh, look at me. Everyone thinks I live the housewife lifestyle, and he's actually the one that does all the cooking. I just think I have enough confidence in myself with what I'm doing that no one can really tear me down. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion, and I'm entitled to my own opinion. The biggest controversial thing is that the 50s was not the greatest time politically, and I realized that. And so the biggest thing is, because I live in a 50s home, that people automatically say I'm racist. And I always say vintage style, not vintage values. I just like the decor and the style, but I do not agree with any of the political values of the 50s. So now we're going to my favorite antique store called the Brass Armadillo, which is really where my obsession for vintage first started. Let's go. So my mom has been taking me to this antique mall since I was a little girl, and this is really what started my love of vintage, because she would take me around this store and tell me all the history of all the antique items I was looking at. So let's go. Now this is a really fun find. It is a 1960s Cinderella cookie jar. This would probably retail for about $100 and it's only $25 here, so I say score. All right, let's keep looking. When I'm going shopping and I know that there's a rack of clothes with vintage and modern, I like to close my eyes and feel around, and I can always pick out what is vintage and what is modern clothing just by the feel of the fabric. I'm very happy with what I got today. I found something that's vintage Disney from the 60s. It was only $25. It's valued at $100, so I would say that's a pretty good score. I would say I'm obsessed with vintage. I might be a little crazy. I absolutely believe I'll be living the 1950s lifestyle forever.